The first laugh came from the far end of the boardroom table. Not loud, not aggressive, just dismissive enough to sting. I remember the exact moment because I was standing, projector still warm behind me, my final slide frozen on the screen, numbers aligned. Projections conservative, risks clearly outlined. Everything I had worked on for 9 months was summarized in 12 slides and one conclusion. Silence followed the laugh. Then another voice joined in. Are we seriously entertaining this? Someone said, tapping their pen against a glass of water. I looked around the room. 12 executives. Custom suits. Relaxed confidence. The kind of people who had never been told no without consequences. At the head of the table sat Martin Harley, CEO, hands folded, lips pressed into something that almost looked like a smile. Almost. So, he said slowly, you're suggesting we halt expansion, freeze acquisitions, and re-audit 3 major revenue streams. Because of a feeling? It's not a feeling, I replied, keeping my voice steady. It's a pattern, one that repeats across subsidiaries in 3 regions. If we don't address it now. A sharp laugh cut me off. Oh, come on, another board member said. You've been here, 2 years? And suddenly you see what none of us have noticed in 20. The room chuckled. That's when I realized this wasn't a discussion. It was a performance. They weren't listening. They were watching me fail. Martin leaned back in his chair. Let's be clear, he said. This company didn't reach a multi-billion-dollar valuation by panicking every time an analyst sees shadows in spreadsheets. More nods, more smirks. Someone muttered, paranoid accounting. Another added, junior syndrome. I stood there, hands clasped behind my back, feeling every eye on me. Not with curiosity, but with amusement. Thank you for your enthusiasm, Martin concluded. But we'll stick with the current strategy. Then casually, like it was an afterthought, he added. And maybe next time, bring something a little less dramatic. Laughter filled the room. I sat down slowly. Meeting adjourned. As they filed out, I caught fragments of conversation. Ambitious kid. Trying to make a name. Doesn't understand how the real world works. Martin didn't even look at me as he passed. What none of them knew, what no one in that room suspected, was that the data I showed them was already incomplete. Because 3 weeks earlier, when I first noticed the discrepancies, I stopped using internal dashboards. I started building my own. Raw data, independent verification, external cross-checks. And what I found went far beyond shadows. It was structural, intentional, and massive. But I didn't push again. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. That was mistake number 1 they thought I made. Over the next 6 weeks, I became invisible. No more presentations. No more questions in meetings. No late-night emails. I showed up. I did my job. I smiled when spoken to, and quietly, methodically, I documented everything. Every overridden control. Every delayed audit. Every temporary adjustment that never reversed. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't mismanagement. It was orchestration. Revenue pulled forward to inflate quarterly results. Losses buried in shell entities. Risk transferred just long enough to pass regulatory windows. And at the center of it all, Martin. Not alone, but protected. The board didn't just ignore the warning signs. They benefited from them. Then came the email. Subject: Strategic Restructuring Update. Time: 7:42 a.m. It was short, polite, clinical, effective immediately. Your role has been eliminated as part of organizational realignment. Please report to HR at 9 a.m. No meeting. No explanation. No discussion. Security access cut at 8:55. I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting it. What they didn't expect was that the same morning, while they were congratulating themselves for silencing a problem, another meeting was already in motion. Not in that building. Not even in that city. A meeting involving 3 regulatory agencies, 2 international banks, and 1 forensic accounting firm that didn't answer to Martin Harley or his board. A meeting triggered by a data package sent at exactly 6 a.m. from an anonymous source. By noon, the stock price dipped. By evening, it collapsed. And by the next morning, the number $5.2 billion would appear in headlines next to words like exposure, investigation, and systemic failure. But at 9 a.m. sharp, as I handed my badge to security and walked out of the building, none of them were laughing anymore. They just didn't know it yet. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone had already started vibrating. I didn't check it. I knew what would be coming. When a system collapses, the first instinct is denial. The second is panic. And the third always is finding someone to blame. I drove home slowly, letting the city blur past my windshield, replaying the boardroom laughter in my head. Not with anger, with clarity. Because humiliation only hurts when you don't yet understand the power dynamics. Once you do, it becomes information. At 11:18 a.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered. "Is this you?" A voice demanded without greeting. It was Martin. "No," I said calmly. "This is the consequence." Silence on the other end. Then lower, controlled, dangerous. "You have no idea what you've started." I smiled. "That's where you're wrong," I replied. "I know exactly what I started. You just don't know where it ends." I hung up. By early afternoon, the first internal memo leaked. By mid-afternoon, analysts began asking questions. By evening, regulators stopped asking and started subpoenaing. The problem with manipulating numbers at scale is that once one thread is pulled, the entire structure unravels. And the structure Martin built wasn't fragile, it was overconfident. Auditors found discrepancies within hours, not because they were brilliant, but because the truth, once unprotected, is loud. Subsidiary accounts didn't reconcile. Internal transfers didn't align with reported cash flow. Risk exposure had been disguised so aggressively that correcting it erased years of artificial growth overnight. At 7:42 p.m., the board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Someone texted me a photo of the conference room TV, red arrows. Breaking news. The company's valuation hemorrhaging in real time. Down $1.8 billion. Then $3.40. Then the final number settled. $5.2 billion wiped out. By midnight, Martin resigned. Not publicly. Not gracefully. Quietly, legally, with language that screamed liability avoidance. The next morning, federal investigators arrived. The day after that, international partners froze contracts. And by the end of the week, the board that once laughed at me was being interviewed separately. I received one final email from HR. Subject: clarification. It was short. "We would like to clarify that your termination was not performance-related." I didn't respond, because by then, I had already accepted an offer. Not from a competitor, from the oversight consortium that had initiated the investigation. They didn't want revenge. They wanted prevention. A role with full independence, full authority, and one requirement: never let this happen again. 3 months later, indictments were filed. 6 executives charged. 2 pleaded out. 1 tried to fight. Martin testified. Not against me. Against the board. Turns out loyalty collapses faster than stock prices when prison enters the equation. People asked me how it felt. To be mocked. To be fired. To be proven right. I told them the truth. The worst moment wasn't the laughter. It was the realization that everyone in that room had chosen comfort over responsibility. And the most satisfying part wasn't the downfall. It was knowing I never raised my voice, never begged, never exposed myself emotionally. I let the facts speak, because arrogance is loud, but evidence is permanent.